Let me ask a question at that point, because this is one that
Mm.
comes up very often. I'm asked this question often. Is there any way to prepare oneself to be ready?
I think preparedness can happen, but it's not something you can do. So let me unpack that. What I mean by that is that for me, when I was very young, in my 20s and 30s, I had what I call openings. So these openings were experiences that were outside of my personality as it was at that point in my life. It was like being lifted up. You know, when people talk about out-of-body experiences, it was like that, lifted up and looking down on that life, which for the rest of the time I thought was who I was and was totally real and was the only reality. So these weren't, I'm not talking about, they were very practical in a way. And it seemed to be life showed me that there was a way, there was something that I hadn't known, that there was there was a side of life that could be lived that wasn't invested and engaged only in that personality. And that opening showed me the qualities of that. One of them is stillness. So really it's like the mind is not in its usual busyness. It may be still there, but you're not lost in its crazy busyness. So stillness, joy, which you could kind of maybe put with love. Now this is a joy that's not based, I'm not talking about happiness, you've won the lottery. I'm talking about the joy that exists prior to any event causing it, okay? The third one would be choiceless awareness, which is, I know, a term that you use, I think I've seen. And the fourth one would be full feeling engagement with life. So those four things I've looked back and I've realized characterize those experiences. Now I find that my experience was that those were things that I came into this life with, and that's what I seem to see in very young children. So the openings were like a taste, a glimpse back of what I call our natural state. So I found that during these openings, which I in no way caused, and of course I wanted more of them, and of course they were not at my beck and call, and as soon as I wanted them, they disappeared. But I was blessed with quite a few through my 20s and 30s. So these showed me there was another way of living, another kind of reality. And I'm not really talking a spiritual realm or anything. I'm talking this realm, this reality, but it's living it not through this conglomeration of functionality that we call personality, that holds our pain, that comes from the personality. So this went on through my 20s and 30s sporadically. And it was, I guess it was like a guiding light, like a beacon that showed me, you know, sometimes it would disappear for years and then it would come back. And it seemed like I was given such a gift because it was, you know, nobody else had told me about this. I didn't tell anyone about them because this seemed such a private thing between me and life. But it was a gift that I seemed to have been given, and I had no idea why. And it was nothing about being special. It seemed to me more a gift that seemed to be saying to me, hey, there's something else going on here. So this started for me a spiritual search, which is, I think, seeking as a very bad name now. I kind of understand why. I was thinking about that term and I was thinking, well, after those openings, I started seeking because I wanted to know what these openings were about and what they meant. And surely someone else must have had them and perhaps they can help me find what they meant. So my seeking, I think seeking has become associated now with escape, but my seeking was about the opposite. I wanted to reveal to find out what these meant. So I did the usual rounds of going to teachers, and I ended up in Rajneesh's organization for not long, couple of years. And other people, like you do, I searched everywhere for answers to this. And I never really found the answer. I mean, I learned a lot along the way, and I had some interesting experiences, but no one really gave me the answer until what happened to me, where I was birthed out of that identification with personality. Now, for me, that happened in a very dramatic and painful way. And that was in 2004. And that was a breakdown. So, are you interested in this?
Of course. You have my full attention.
So, like I said, I had these two parts of my life. I had the character my character seemed to be pretty confident. And I had the success, so that kind of helped bolster that too. I would do tours, I would promote my books, and I was being pretty successful. So this is one side of my life. I was aware underneath that there was another side, which was the suffering of my personality. And there was great grief and pain in that. Now, most of the time, that didn't much impinge on that, although I knew it was there. But the way I describe it is when I had a breakdown, that pain of the suffering of my personality came over and took over from this character one. And it was so strong that the functioning of that character was curtailed. It was a switch going off. It was a very dramatic event. And because I had previously been so confident and successful in the world, people couldn't believe it because it was an absolute change. Because my life became absolutely secluded because I couldn't function in the world. I couldn't do what normal people could do because I felt like I had no center from which to do it. So for many years, I kind of became a recluse. I mean, that was real social distancing. Now, this was not something I chose. This is not something I thought was a practice. I had absolutely no choice in it. It was something that happened to me that I had to ride and deal with. And it seemed to me in the middle of it that it was never going to end. And it was a very terrible, terrible thing, because I think breaking down for most people is probably the worst fear, which I understand, because we need a sense of who we are and an ability to function and operate. And if that is suddenly taken away, it's the most scary thing, I think, that can happen to you. So my birthing into this, my way to this was dramatic and very painful. And I'm aware that it doesn't have to be that way. And I know some people hear my story and they freak out because they think, geez, I don't want that happening to me. And I totally understand that. But what I would say is that the basis of what happened to me, which is the dismantling of my personality and my identification with it, that we're talking about to be revealed. So I've seen that happen, and it hasn't happened in the same way as it happened to me. There was no big one dramatic breakdown. But I have seen the same effect happen over many years, the breaking down of that identification with that personality, and the same results that come from it. So it's been like a kind of case study for me. And I've seen it in perhaps one other two starting to happen. Yeah. So yeah, it was quite a journey. My books are the fruit of that experience and the writer in me wanting to capture and express what I learned from that experience. And what those books are is they're really a map. Now, I think there can be an aversion to maps because it sounds like someone's trying to kind of create a system. But I found, I think in my job as a picture book artist, I had to, in order to write stories, you have to break down information and knowledge and choose very carefully what piece of information is delivered at each point in the story to tell that story to its best advantage. So if you put the denouement in the middle act, it's not a good thing. The whole thing won't work so well because they won't have had the information to understand the denouement. So that way of thinking that I've learned and craft of structuring things is something I very much applied to my books. And I wanted to lay this thing out that I had seen from the inside in very clear steps so that it grows. So like if you get that step, this step makes sense, and this step makes sense. And I didn't want to take for granted that anybody knew what I was talking about. And I developed a language that I hope has clarified exactly what I mean by these terms, because as we know, language is fluid and can mean very different things to different people. So in the back of my book, I have a glossary where I'm very carefully define exactly what I mean by those terms so that my communication of this is as clear as it can be. What I mean by readiness is, I think there's two levels to it. The first level of readiness would be a dissatisfaction with the idea of being fulfilled by the normal pursuits that one has, human pursuits in life, success, money, whatever it is. So there's a step of dissatisfaction with that, which is step one. Then often people move on to the spiritual realm and they project all the same things in the spiritual realm. And then, of course, as you point out, one can get lost and stuck in that. And it's very easy to. And the journey can kind of end there. It can be truncated. It can be cut short. And new beliefs are adopted, new ideals, but it's still a personality. It's a spiritual personality. So for me, the real doorway, gateway to this is when, of readiness, is when there is a readiness to see through that whole spiritual personality and game too. And not many people want to go there because that is that same fear that I expressed about the breakdown, that people think, well, what will be left? And there's a natural aversion to it, because if you have everything invested in, I am this thing, this personality, the last thing you want to do is give it up. So it's better to stay this side of the line, be a devotee, be a spiritual person and have that personality than cross that line. But my contention is that there is a step of ready. When you're ready, there is a line that can be crossed. And this is what I feel you're talking about. And the reason I heard of you is because I saw the Back Gap interview. And I thought, someone talking from the other side of the line, you know, and this is what I loved. It was great. Yeah, I've said a lot.
That's just beautiful. Thank you so much for going into that, Jez. It's just a pleasure to hear you that way, because it's so clear. It's just a very clear statement. Obviously comes from personal experience.
Yeah.
And which is the only kind of experience there really is.